overconsumption in the book community a problem? I have been watching on this platform for a while. I have been on TikTok's or Book Talk's platform even longer. And then obviously I've been making content there for a little over a year now. And so I've seen it all. I've seen it all, and I have seen all the opinions. I will say that the opinions on this platform versus the Book Talk platform are kind of night and day from each other. I get a generalized consensus on this platform that it is believed to be a problem. Overconsumption is a problem. And Book Talk is, I'm going to do what I want when I want, and you're not going to tell me nothing. So I just wanted to come today and kind of weigh in my 2 cents. We have a lot of things happening in the book community that I'm sure you are aware of by now. One of them that kind of, I think, sparked this conversation for me is Amazon's Kindle devices doing away with the ability to download your books onto a PC, which allows consumers to be able to not only back up these books, but they can also transfer these files and use them on other reading devices like their tablets and iPads or other e-readers that are not Kindle devices. And how that has kind of further limited our ownership of things, and how that kind of plays into the overconsumption of books and whether or not that is a problem. If you're new here, my name is Erica. Hi, welcome to my little bookish corner of the interweb. I'm happy to have you here. Given the recent events of the Amazon Kindle debacle and what that means for us as consumers, it has caused me to do a lot of thinking about media specifically, especially in a world where censorship is becoming, I feel like, very prominent in our everyday spaces. And while that may not be the case for you, I implore you to realize that outside of your circle, that is not the case everywhere. I live in a predominantly conservative state. Our libraries and the peoples given the different parishes that you live in, cities for other people outside of my state, depending on the parish that you live in, the majority of our parishes are conservative. We only have really 2 parishes that lean more liberal, which means that those libraries are not as much under attack as they are in our other communities. I live in an extremely small town. Our library is in a church. So I'm sure you can only imagine what that means for access of books. And this doesn't mean that every single LGBTQ plus book has been removed from these books, but there are other topics and conversations within books that are very much not allowed. There was a time the Hunger Games was not allowed in our libraries in certain parishes. And there are other books that are not allowed or not carried in these parishes because I live in this extremely small town. Diverse authors is not something we have a whole lot of access to. And so always going to the library is not always an option for everyone to get all the books that you want to read. Prior to a little over a year ago, I was primarily a Kindle reader. All of my books were consumed ebooks. I didn't buy physical books. For me, it was easier to just have the ebooks. But the thing about ebooks then was that you could download these books and permanently have the ebook files forever. And now they're taking that away. And I, call me old-fashioned, believe that if I've bought something, that it is mine. That would be like going and buying a book at a bookstore, and then a couple weeks later, the owner coming and taking the book away from you, unless you agree to only read it in their store. Right? That I've also heard a lot of the phrase saying that if buying is not ownership, then piracy should not be stealing or copying. And while normally I would agree that overall we all agree piracy is wrong, when you sit there and you think about it in that perspective, it kind of makes sense. So I'm sure you're wondering how all of this rolls into my thoughts on overconsumption in the book space. And I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So if we don't own the ebooks that we are purchasing, and we don't have access to libraries with broad amount of books, where do we consume our media? What happens when they really start coming for our books and our literature? You know, it didn't stop Kindle from removing 1984 by George Orwell, which, you know, they'll say that it was because whoever had it didn't have the legal rights to it. But honestly, given the topic and conversation in that book, I find it oddly ironic. So what happens to these books if the only way we are consuming them is ebooks and we don't own them? So if they want to take the book away or they want to remove the book, we no longer have the book at all. So to me, that feels a lot like the potential for erasing And it made me start thinking a lot about consumption and overconsumption, and whether or not we should be buying all of our books, or if we should be heavily relying on our libraries. And for me, obviously, the library is not always an option. I understand that in other states and in other cities and in other places, they have vast, large libraries, and it's easily accessible to get the books that you want to read. And for those people, I say do that, utilize that. However, I'm getting a little older in age here, and it started making me think about music and other forms of media that we consume. The vast majority of music that we consume now is through streaming services. When I was growing up in high school, we still had CDs. You bought your CDs, you burned your CDs, we all had CDs. And that was how we kept our music. Recently, the influx of vinyl popularity has come back around, but the vast majority of vinyl owners don't have record players, which was a weird little thing that I looked into. And so there is that, and I love that, because the reality is the longevity of a vinyl, if you take care of it, is endless at this point, because we still have vinyls from the 60s and 70s and 80s that are still working. But what has happened now is newer cars don't have CD players. They have Bluetooth through your car or through your phone that you use to stream your music services that you pay a monthly fee on. So you're basically paying over and over and over and over again to own this music that you don't ever really own. So what happens when we all get in our ripe old age of 60 and 70, and the popular music that we love today that we still want to listen to then is no longer available, because it's not as popular, or it's not as readily available, or it's not as easily to find, because Lord knows what the world of listening and consuming music will look like by then. How are we going to access that if we don't have physical copies? So obviously that led over to books as well. Now, while I am obviously making a very broad statement here that I am in favor of buying media, the same thing goes for video games. I love cozy gaming. Love it. When I buy a game for my Switch, I always buy the physical copy. With the exception of that is the Disney Dreamscape game, and that is because there's not an option for it in a physical copy. If there had been, though, I would have bought it. I'm a firm believer of physical copies. I know there was recently a big uproar, in the Call of Duty universe. I don't play that, my husband does. And they took away, I think, Call of Duty 1 or something like that, and no one can find physical copies of it, and these people have lost hours and hours and hours of gaming and content and things that they won or got or bought or whatever. I don't really know because I don't play it, but obviously all of that was gone, and they paid for these games, and now they no longer have them. So we're paying to own something, especially in games. Like, video games cost just as much for a digital copy as it does for a physical copy. So in my mind, obviously I'm buying the physical copy so that I can always have it. As long as that works for that system, I'm paying for the physical copy, period. And so obviously I'm saying that I'm a big advocate of buying our media. Music, I have streaming services. I have Amazon Music. I also have Spotify. And I think that those avenues are great for exploring music, because we don't have music stores like we used to when I was still kind of growing up, and they were dying out then. But you were able to go to like Barnes & Noble, and they had a whole media section for music, and you could put the little headphones on, and you could like preview the records or the CDs or whatever before you bought them. And obviously that doesn't really exist anymore. And so I think that those apps are wonderful for previewing music and finding artists and artist discovery and song discovery. But when I find something I really love, I'm buying it. I'm going to buy it now so that I have it physically, so that no one can take it away from me when I have bought it. I mean, call me paranoid, okay? But I mean, it's just the world we're living in. We're becoming very, very subscription reliant, anything reliant. And then what happens when they take this away? What happens when they start censoring those? What happens when they start removing these books and these music and these things? So, do I think there's an issue with overconsumption? There's an issue with overconsumption anywhere, in any hobby, in anything. There just is. There's a line, and there are people who are willing to cross that line. Obviously, I am not in favor of that. I am not saying to go out and do 100 book hauls every week. I am not saying go out and buy every book under the sun for fear that it will not be here. That's not what I'm saying. I am just saying that for me, I will always be for physically buying books. I think about books like Fahrenheit 451 all the time. And yes, that's a dystopian novel, and obviously it's fiction. But living where I live, I'm very much seeing that slowly coming into fruition. I mean, there are parishes that are trying to defund the libraries completely, unless they agree to not carry anything LGBTQ plus or anything this or anything that, and that is scary. It's literally a First Amendment right. And we're telling people they can't have it, and they can't do it, and they can't write it, and they can't read it. So, I will always be in favor of buying books, Because what happens when they start taking them away from us? How are we going to have access to that? And I guess if you don't know and you've not read it, then it's not something you're missing until you are. Until, call me, like I said, paranoid or whatever. I just think it's made me think about ownership and how I'm spending my money and where my money is going. We all know that Amazon there's a lot wrong with Amazon. And that's why I moved over to the books tablets. Yes, I do have Kindle books, and a lot of my books have been downloaded to be able to transfer over to other devices, because I've tried to cut out the amount of reliability on the Zon. Do I still have an Amazon account? Yeah, I do. I got 3 kids. I can't lie. That when it comes to saving money, that sometimes that is just the place to go. When it comes time for Christmas, that's where I do the majority of my shopping. It's hard to shop for 3 kids when they're the age they are and keep things a secret. It comes in a box. That doesn't mean I don't shop small or whatever else. Also, that my husband owns a business, and sometimes parts and things for jobs are just cheaper there. And I hate that it is that way, but it just is that way. But I can be intentional, and I can be aware of my rights as a consumer and when they're being infringed upon. And I just think that if I've bought something and for you to tell me that I can't have it now, it's not okay. And I understand that when we're buying ebooks, that we're only paying for a license. But having that function of downloading it made it a more permanent purchase. Like, remove it from the Kindle app all you want. I still have it though. And I don't have to buy it again. Maybe my thought here is just the reliability on technology and not always being so reliant on it as our permanent avenue for our libraries or our collections or whatever that we choose to collect, or just media in general, how we are consuming our media. I think we get so caught up in the thought of overconsumption that we're trying to live on 2 extremes. We've got people who are trying to push don't buy anything at all, and then we have people who are buying too much. And I think there should be a happy median. And I'm not going to tell you not to buy books or records or music or whatever type of media that you choose to consume. I think at this point in time, with the way the world is moving, I think it is important to have access to your favorite books and your favorite artists, your favorite albums, and not have to worry about those disappearing or having to pay more money to get it somewhere else. I think we're just spending entirely too much money on subscriptions. We talk about overconsumption. We talk about that. That's a form of overconsumption. How many subscription services do I have? Honestly, if I thought about it, it's an embarrassing amount. And it's ridiculous. I'm having to pay every month just to access things that I've already paid for. Think about Amazon Prime or Netflix or Disney Plus. You pay for the monthly subscription, but then if you want access to certain movies or whatever, then you pay an additional fee. But then if you stop paying your monthly subscription, you can't access those movies that you bought. Yeah, I just think that's wild. So I don't disagree that there's an issue with overconsumption within the book space. There's an issue with it in all spaces. But I'm not going to tell people not to buy books. I will continue to buy books. Can we be more intentional as consumers with how we are buying books or repurposing books? Yeah. Utilize buyback programs, utilize donations, utilize the little free libraries, utilize all of that. I do. I go to Second and Charles with my unhauls after I have offered it to my daughter or kids or people and friends I know. And then it all goes to Second and Charles. And they buy back what they'll buy back, which they've never not taken anything. But they'll buy back what they buy back, and then I'll use that money in their store to buy other books that I want. I think it's a great system. I think that should be a system we have everywhere. Reuse, repurpose, recycle. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to be a consumer and be a mindful consumer. End all be all, no. I don't think that overconsumption is a across-the-board problem in the book community. I think there are extremes everywhere, and there are obviously those who fit that. But the everyday average person, we're just buying books we like. There are issues, obviously, with publication and the overproduction of books and multiple editions of books and all that other stuff. And that more so plays into more of the capitalist greed that is happening. And we as consumers falling into that. But also, I'm not against collecting. If it's a series or a book that you really love, I'm not against you having 40 copies of it. That's your prerogative. Heck, one day that might be your college tuition for your child, if need be. Or God forbid, something happens and you can't afford your medical expenses. That's a great thing to some of these books resell for an astronomical amount. I follow a man on Book Talk who, that's all he is a massive book collector. His book collection, I just want to stand in his vault for just 2 seconds and just breathe in the amount of history and knowledge that is within those walls. And so I think that buying books will always be important. It will always be important to physically own media, versus relying on streaming services and technology to be those storage places for it. Especially when we're talking about places like where I live and our libraries, I don't know the future of them. And so when you start thinking about that, that's kind of scary. It's not always an option for all people. So I think buying is important, but obviously be responsible. That's with all things. So that is all. I hope you're all having a great day. Bye.